Balchem has spent decades perfecting the art of microencapsulation for both the human and animal nutrition segments. Add in food processing and nutrition expertise, and we have the complete package you need to overcome the formulation or production challenges that hinder innovation. Look to PetSure from Balchem to provide the expertise and capabilities that redefine entire product categories and help bring your imagined products to reality.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Lecture Series. And we're thrilled to be back with our first companion animal webinar of 2022. For today's Real Science webinar, we welcome Dr. Charles Starkey from Auburn University. Dr. Starkey will walk us through some of the newest research and extensive work that is being done to maximize utilization of co-products. Dr. Starkey received his BS and MS degrees from Arkansas State University and his PhD in animal nutrition from Kansas State University. He began his career as a new business development manager for DSM Nutritional Products and has also worked as a nutrition and production management consultant. More recently, Dr. Starkey was the Director of Technical Services for American Proteins and Director of Monogastric Technical Services for Balchem Corporation, just prior to joining the faculty at Auburn University's Poultry Science Department in May of 2016. Dr. Starkey and his spouse, Dr. Jessica Starkey, co-coordinate a laboratory in which fundamental science is applied to answer everyday questions in animal agriculture. Charles, take it away.
First of all, I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here. I feel very humbled to be a part of this series. Everything we're able to do here at Auburn is from the support of stakeholders and companies like Balchem and other people that I know in our attendance. And I just want to start out by thanking everyone. Our work here in pet food is very new. There's not a lot of work been done in this area. I do teach animal food manufacturing here at Auburn, and as part of that, one of our drives is to teach students about the manufacturing of animal food. Being in the Poultry Science Department, we also have an obligation to our industry stakeholders on that side to help them achieve their best economic value for their products. So we do a lot of work in that with the pet food projects, but that's where we're kind of combining the two. I think there's a lot of opportunities for increased economic appreciation from both the pet food side as well as the poultry industry. There are definitely shortages on certain proteins out there on the market, and what we're trying to do is do some work using some functional food technologies that aren't new but haven't been applied in to some of these other areas to really combine those uses of these proteins and increase the opportunities for the industry. Just a little bit about our lab. We've had over 107 undergrad research assistants, 43 international scholars. The big picture in the center was our lab at IPPE. And you can see there's actually a few missing from there, so we keep a lot of students. We've had over 22 grad students between my wife and I. We kind of co-run our laboratories. And we want to train in food science because I feel in agriculture we're all part of food science, but especially when we're talking about animal food manufacturing with the new FSMA rules, FDA looks at animal food just like human food. And so the regulatory side and the science side behind it's important. Through these projects, we've generated over about 80 abstracts, and we got about 20 publishable projects, and several of those are in work. We just had 2 accepted for publication. We had 1 undergraduate thesis from a student from Zamorano University who came and did his research internship with us. And then we've had 4 different master's theses. 2 of them are in the works and 2 of them are completed already. And it's all involving this work around the use of co-products, animal co-products, as protein sources to manufacture pet treats. And this is early product development work, but we take low value products. When you think of things like downgraded chicken paws, wingtips, livers, hearts, things that aren't normally in our meals, and we're looking to upscale those or upcycle those into products that are very, very useful and functional for pet treats, and we hope in some cases a complete pet diet. We're using a structure forming technology, hydrocolloid technology, that's been used in human food for quite a while to make this happen. And we're taking a product that's often sold for as little as 6 to 13 cents a kilo, and we're turning it into a value product. Our current average, we've been doing some market surveys on prices of pet treats. And our current average is well over $18, and the maximum price is up to $30 per pound for certain higher value or higher end pet treats. So there's a lot of room for increasing the value of this as we go forward. So animal co-products can be used in a lot of countries and cultures as delicacies. We have places in Africa that take the whole viscera pack from a bird and make a special soup out of it. We know about consumption of chicken paws. We have them here in our stores, actually in Auburn as well. And pig's feet and more traditional historic type dishes are made from some of these co-products. But if we look overall on an American menu, especially in a restaurant setting, we don't really see these products on the menu. And so what we're trying to do, because of that, they have a lower economic value to the processor. And so what we're trying to do is give those more economic value and find ways to incorporate those into pet treats. It also allows the pet food industry access to really high quality proteins. That some of them are very rich in vitamins and minerals when we think about liver and heart tissue, and they can add some sensory and functional properties to the end product as well. So overall, processing is just the conversion of live animals into real retail cuts for human consumption. That's how it's defined by the USDA. But in that process, we generate a lot of lower value co-products. When you go to a restaurant and you order chicken wings, you don't see any wingtips, and those products have to go somewhere. So we can reutilize those products and using some functional food technologies, make them much more useful for other reasons. If we look at the broiler industry itself, combined values $35.5 billion. About 61% of that is from actual broilers, and we produced 9.2 billion broilers in 2020 just here in the U.S. alone. So there's a tremendous amount of poultry production. Poultry is the #1 species globally, and if you think about primary proteins, it's dairy and egg first, and egg, of course, comes from poultry. And then the second primary protein would either be a chicken meat or maybe aquaculture if you're near a water system. So these are important businesses globally, and with that, we have a lot of co-products that can be produced. Chicken co-products tend to be the most highly utilized protein sources in dry dog treats. We've got a lot of, at any time, we have over 500 million chickens on the ground. Again, over 9 billion total produced in a year. And we've exported 6 to 7 billion pounds of broiler meat over the last decade. So it's a large export market. Some of that export would include things like the chicken paws, wingtips, heart, and liver as well. So we do have some of these products that are currently in the export market and desired by other cultures and markets. Again, we just talk about the co-product is a part of the dressed animal that's not included in the dressed carcass. Many of these products are human food grade, and that's something important to remember. Most all of our work to date has been done with human food grade products. We're not looking at viscera pack or intestines or anything at this time. We often use these for other purposes. Many of you in the pet food side are familiar with liver being used as a liver digest for flavor additives and things like that. So they have some use. They do have some export value, but still when we compare them to the human cuts, they're pretty low. And what's important about that is about 44% of a live cow ends up being what we consider a co-product, not a human select cut of meat that we sell, to the grocery store or to the restaurant market for retail. And about 37% of poultry would be excluded from that market as well. So those are really high percentages of animals that we process, and we look toward things, a way to improve sustainability, way to improve repurposing of products. Rendering is a great tool, and it works very well with these products. We can make really highly nutritious dried protein meals by cooking these products down and removing the moisture. But I think there are opportunities to also utilize them in other ways, and that's part of what the work we've been doing here. Again, the wingtip, as you can see here, you don't ever see the tip in a restaurant. It's not a large proportion of the carcass, but we get 2 off of every bird, and it adds up to, when you're processing 1 million birds a week in a complex, and we have well over 120 complexes in the U.S. It just the numbers add up to a larger amount of weight. So we have a lot of tips, we have a lot of paws that are not exported, and things like that that are available here as protein sources that we can utilize. A couple more that we've been working with, wooden breast, which is a big issue in the industry. In these fast-growing genetics, we've developed some myopathies in the breast muscle, and you can see there's a hardness. This muscle is very, very firm to touch. Many of you that consume chicken sandwiches, you may have bitten into one, got one that seemed unusually rubbery or tough. That was probably because of the wooden breast. Now, the industry is rapidly getting this out of the system through proper selection and nutrition, but there's still some present. The processors are using this pretty widely in other food products. So ground chicken sausage, cubes that you may find in a ready-to-cook Italian dish, or fajita-type strip meat that you find in ready-to-cook products. So this product's still useful. There's nothing really unwholesome about it. It's more a texture, feel issue for the consumer. But another product that we have is the whole carcass frame, which is what's left over after we remove all the muscle tissue. So it includes the neck, the back, and the rib cage. These products still have very high, very nutritious protein in them, and can be utilized to make other products as well. When we continue on the talk, we have liver. It's the largest gland in animals. It is the most consumed by human animal co-product. But if you think about it, you might remember your grandmother or your mother cooking liver for dinner, but how often have you had it recently? We just don't eat that much liver, other organs, including kidneys and things. That's just not on the menu anymore. It contains a protein level very close to lean meat. It also contains very high levels of minerals and vitamins that can add a lot of nutrition to an end product for an animal. One of the big problems with the liver historically is it's very, very difficult to process. If you don't cook whole liver, if you try to grind it up, it basically turns into a liquid soup. This is very hard to reutilize without adequate equipment, or unless you've got a process set up to inject liquids into a product stream. The heart represents about 0.5% of cattle live weight. Again, very rich in protein, vitamins, and minerals. It is a traditional dish in some countries and cultures, but here in the U.S., you really don't see heart on the menu. You don't see it very often at the grocery store, so it's not a commonly used food item here in the U.S. So it's a great protein. It's cardiac muscle. It's pretty rigid, so it can provide a lot of good structure to products as well. So it's an interesting choice of product to use. Processing co-products, we also have other opportunities. But one of the things we've got to do is we've got to look at value parameters. We've got to be able to make quality finished products out of these organs. Like I said, liver tends to liquefy, so that can be problematic when making a finished product. Water loss or leakage is a big issue when we talk about using high levels of liver in that system. So that's kind of part of what the one side on the processing industry, broiler and mammals, where we talk about where the products come from, and it's a great resource of these really high protein products that really aren't maybe getting the economic value they deserve, for example. So we're going to talk a little bit about the other side when we talk about the pet food industry and where I think a lot of those products could go and really fill some niches when we have such a strain on protein supply and protein just keeps getting, the cost of protein keeps increasing. So we talk about pet humanization. We're always doing more for our pets. We're looking for healthy food products. We're looking for organic. We're looking for sustainable. Sustainability consumers are more and more increasingly choosing products based on sustainability value. We can use animal protein products to develop pet treats and also pet foods. And again, these proteins, when we talk about specifically the heart and the liver, they can be really high in vitamins and minerals and add other nutrients to the diet that can provide a healthy treat by using what may be a lower value or lower cost protein stream. 82% of pet owners buy some type of treat. And so it's a very large and growing market. We have fur babies now. I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but the picture on the right is myself providing treats to our dogs. We always want to give treats as affection or use them during training. But one thing we don't do, we can also use treats to deliver functional nutrients. So probiotics, brain health, dental health. We have a lot of dental health treats out on the market. Antioxidant defense, things of that nature. So pet treats are a really good avenue to provide specific nutrients, especially if you need them for your pet for a specific reason. The pet treat market is influenced by several factors. Price, of course, is always first and foremost. Packaging, you need packaging that catches the eye. Marketing is very big in pet food and pet treats. You want sensory properties. The dogs and the cats have to like the treat. They have to want to consume it. We have to look at the sensory attributes as color and texture and flavor. Are they palatable to the dog or the cat or other animal? But these are things that influence the owner's purchase decisions. Color may not be as important to the dog, but the dog is not the one purchasing the treat. It's the consumer, the owner. So we want color to stay stable and not change throughout. We want a good texture in the product. I have an opinion, and everybody has their opinion on what their pets like, but something that's chewy and doesn't break apart. Also, if you think about giving treats in the household, you don't want something that's just going to crumble and go all over the carpet. You want something that has it has ability to bind to itself, may not crumble into as many pieces, and may not cause a mess on your floor. If we talk about expenditures, about 42 billion of the total were spent on pet food and pet treats in 2020. We've got 90 million households with a pet, about 69 million of them, so 2/3, a little over 2/3 have at least one dog. And then dog food and treat market was valued at 66 billion during 2020. One other really interesting thing about pet food is it is increasing very rapidly. This slide was shared by a colleague, and it's very, very interesting. The growth of the pet food industry, especially when you look at a few numbers here. We've got a 31% overall growth in pet food, where in human packaged foods, it was only 23 and fresh foods was 16. So pet food, while it's a smaller total overall market, it is growing at a faster rate. If we all think about the last couple of years, pet ownership increased, rescues from shelters increased, we were home a lot more. A lot of people opted to try to take care of a pet at home, and that's helped lead to increase in sales. We just look at projections by category. I apologize, it's a little bit older data. It only goes to 2017, but you can see a slow but steady increase continually in pet food. So pet food isn't going anywhere. It's going to continue to increase. Because of that, we need more protein to produce these final products. So we have to look at this increase and be aware of it and make certain that we have adequate protein to make these products. And again, co-products are the most common source that we use. We can incorporate protein into baked products. Here we have a picture of some liver and heart combination treats that we were manufacturing during one of the projects. So there's a lot of opportunity to do those. So we felt that animal co-processing products can have a higher value, still be a cheaper source of protein than, say, whole meat by pet food companies, but we can restructure those using just traditional hydrocolloid technology that has been used in the food industry for years. They're high molecular weight polymers, and they're used to improve the textural aspects of a food. We have to be careful which ones we select for multiple reasons. Some of the hydrocolloids have a bad image because of how they're harvested or collected. Some of them we worry about their being a healthy product, but many of these that are out there have been used for years in human food, so there's quite a few available. The final step that we have to be concerned about in selection is, does it work? How well does it work with the different protein or the different formulation that we're trying to utilize? Because of the chemical properties, there can be some differences in the adequacy with which the hydrocolloid actually binds the material. So this is just a quick, we can poke a lot of holes in this calculation, but we just did a really quick calculation. If we run 100,000 pounds of a byproduct a week, in this case, we're going to talk about chicken paws. Typical cost is 76 cents a pound, so by week it's 76,000. Inclusion of algin, based on what we've been doing in our experiments, adds 277. Packaging, we're looking at a half-pound stand-up pouch, a resealable pouch type package, and we're going to put a half pound in each. So at 32 cents a unit, that adds up to 64 per pound. And labor, we're adding 75 cents on top of that. And so to get a total of $4.92. So we take a 76 cent per pound product, or if you add the algin, and we turn it into roughly a $5 input cost for the product. And that's important because we'll get back to that in a little bit. Alginate is a type of hydrocolloid that we use in product development. It's great for structure forming. It provides a lot of mechanical strength and flexibility to meat products. It seems to work really well with the proteins specific to meat compared to some other hydrocolloids. It's produced from algae. We extract it and we combine it then into a dry product that we can add. The dryness can also be a benefit in some cases. It improves the microstructure and texture, and in some cases, the flavor and shelf life of food products. We haven't got into testing that as much yet, but that is coming. But really what we've been using it for is just, can we get these products and these proteins to bind well and get a good form, structure form from them. We also, it has a gelling ability, but we add a calcium lactate. The reason for adding the calcium lactate is because a divalent ion helps strengthen that gel, that association between the protein and the water, and what allows that ability to gel. The metal ions improve that, And what we also see is it also increases the holding of the moisture in the product. So that can be a benefit just based on a flexibility of a treat, moisture content overall, and pliability, and the color and the view of the treat. Water has an impact on all that. So binding this water where it's retained, it's not pressed out, it doesn't leach from the end product, I think is an important aspect to what we're doing. Again, certain calcium salts, they can be partly soluble or insoluble. Calcium lactate is totally soluble, which it can be very useful, but it's poorly controlled in its gelation rate. A lot of the industries currently using calcium salt baths for products like sausages and bolognas and summer sausages. One of the issues with that is it dips in there and you get one shot at those ions being able to bind. For that reason, we're actually using an encapsulated calcium lactate product for a slower release. We believe that over time that release provides those ions more sparingly, but over a longer period of time, so we can help increase those bonds. And that's some future work that we're looking to do those comparisons and make certain that that is actually accurate. But again, we use that encap product to get a slow release. We think it increases and strengthens the structure of the final product and the gelling of those proteins. We call our combination Algon. It's sodium alginate plus encapsulated calcium lactate. We combine them together. We're using multiple different concentrations. You'll see later in the presentation. But the main one targeted and based on FDA regulations is 1% sodium alginate. And with that, we've added 0.85% of the calcium lactate product. But we can take these co-products, form them into pet treats by using this hydrocolloid technology that's been used for many years for human food. And the process is really pretty simple. We take a raw product, we grind it down to a very small size, we mix in the sodium alginate first, and then slowly mix in the calcium lactate, and then we chill it and let it gel. The next day, what we've been doing is making the slices, whether they're the rectangle, if we do a jerky gun and form them out in sheets, or we can chub them and just slice the disc off, and that's what we're doing all our measurements on. So one of the things that's different from what I'm doing with these projects, especially since I'm sure there's a lot of industry people on here, we're using this as a teaching tool for students. We have to get these students to know it's great if they know how to raise a chicken in the barn, but if they don't know what that chicken's going for, they're only partway through their education. So we're using these projects as a teaching tool to teach food science techniques, quality control issues, and things like that to our students. And that's a big part of the program as well that we think is very important. Again, this is a project where we use beef heart and beef liver. As you can see, the liver completely liquefies. You can see the structure, though, of the heart that's added in. When we mix that product, we add the sodium alginate, calcium lactate, or the Algon. We extruded those through a jerky stuffer. It was still fairly high liquid prior to the gelation. So we ended up with sheets instead of just flat strips. But we basically cut those, formed them into treats, and we dehydrated them. We measured color on both raw and dehydrated treats. We're wanting to see what the different inclusion concentrations of algae do to the color over time, because that is an important factor for consumer perception. Part of the reason we chose jerky is because it's very common out there in the industry. This is a beautiful display that we found at a show. I think it's really important. I don't know who's on the webinar, but if you eat jerky like I do, this is probably a stand I'd go by and pick product up from. It's a really nice marketing display. The bars look like Epic bars. They're very common out there, but I do want to note in the small print at the bottom, these are pet food treats. These are meat treats for dogs. This whole stand is a display of treats made for dogs. Here we have chicken sausage. Again, meat treats for dogs. Very, very small on the display. And then finally, typical meat sticks that we see. Meat treats for dogs. So with everyone, with the household ownership of pets increasing, and we all think of our pets as our four-legged babies, this is very important. And we're seeing more and more pet food type products mimicking and looking identical to human food, many of which, as you can see on this display, are 100% human grade. Some are even saying they can be used for human food or pet food. And so by using, say, things like liver and heart, which are approved ingredients for human food, you can develop a product that can be used for a pet treat or a human, either one. So we're trying to select things that we can do with that. So I discussed a little bit about the question about liver. Liver liquefies when it's ground, and it can be a real challenge to deal with. One of the other questions we had in the lab, how well does the hydrocolloid work if we pre-cook the protein? So we bought a bunch of Instapots, and we went and we took wingtips raw. We cooked them under high pressure for 90 minutes. We got an average of about 18.5% to 19% water loss. And then we drained those products. We did the same process then. We grind them. Typically, we grind them first through a larger plate, grind plate, and then we go through a smaller one to achieve a very small, fine grind. You can see this is a pretty fine material after the grind. These are actually the pre-cooked wingtips after the first grind versus the second. Then we weigh out the correct proportions. In this particular study, we had no algon inclusion, half of the recommended rate that's allowed by FDA, 1x, and then 2x. Just to see, we're trying to measure differences, and so we structured our treatments so we had one below, one above, and then, of course, a negative control with no added. After we do the inclusion of the algon, we're really just stuffing them into chubs like we would a sausage. We allow that to gel under refrigeration, and then we freeze them for a few hours. And that's the freezing is really for us to facilitate slicing into our samples. We're using a deli meat slicer. So the freezing aids in our ability to slice the product. Excuse me. You can see here we end up with several slices, and that's what we're doing all of our analyses on. So we can take a product that we're pretty doing something pretty simple as far as making a chub sausage, and we can take a lot of different slices out of it to do high replication test. So we are doing all the measurements on raw treats as well when we have those, but then we've been doing some sort of dehydration, either using a smokehouse or an oven. We've tried different parameters. In this case, we cooked the product until it reached 74-degree internal temperature, and then we reduced the temperature, and we based the product removal from the oven on water activity. We did expressible moisture and cooking loss on all the samples, and then we measured color variability on all the samples as well. Different measurements that we're doing. Again, part of my role here is teaching and instructing. So we're trying to teach students about basic QA testing and food safety testing when it comes to final food products. So we're doing water activity and pH. I think those are just important basic chemical tests that need to be conducted. Expressible moisture, we're just doing that with a filter press method. Cooking loss, weighing before and after cooking. A lot of textural parameters. We're looking for different textural characteristics. What we're wanting to do is make a final treat that can be packaged and sold as a finished product. and we want kind of that flexibility and chewiness of it. So we also know that texture can affect palatability. So we want something that can stimulate pets to eat a portion of food, something that might be a little more chewy, that lets them exercise their jaws and spend a little time eating a treat to keep them busy versus something that they just wolf down in one bite. So we're using a texture analyzer to do such things like texture profile analysis. It basically measures hardness, adhesiveness, cohesiveness, springiness, and chewiness of the pet treat. It's to mimic mastication of an animal. We're actually going to get some different fittings to try to do this a little more appropriately, so we can more closely resemble a canine jaw bite. And we can find those probes and get those attached to our meter. We measure the force of the first compression, what goes down, how much does the sample adhere to the probe, and then during the second compression, how much does it regain its original form over time, and things like that. So very basic textural characteristics. Shear force, how tender is the meat? What's the firmness or toughness? Again, it's just a knife blade that we put through the sample to see when it actually cuts through and how much it flexes prior to that. And then we have a 3-point bend test that we're doing. And we're looking for the final breaking strength as well as the flexibility of the treat. How pliable is it? Is it easy to handle? Is it breaking a bunch of pieces immediately? So the flexibility of treats, at least from my opinion, as a consumer of pet treats, I like something that's a little more flexible, that's not going to crumble so readily. So I think this is an important attribute. We do 10, in some cases 10, some of them we've done 40 samples per treatment. Again, looking at 3-point bend, this is a better picture of how that test is actually done. We'll set the sample on here and just the probe moves slowly down, and we measure the total bend. How many millimeters does that treat bend before it finally breaks and there's no more resistance? So that's what we're looking at with this test. The final thing we've been doing is color. And color is one of the more important attributes, I feel, for pet food. It's what the humans that are purchasing the pet food treat rely on. It may not be that important to the dog, what color his treat is, but to the individual purchasing it, it's very important, and they'll make their judgments sometimes on color. Another attribute is color over time. How does that color of that product change over time? If I have, say, some raw pet food or raw pet treats that I'm wanting to keep in the refrigerator and they oxidize and they start to brown, that's going to be a turnoff for consumers. And so we're wanting to look at change over time, as well as something very important. How does the treat change when we add the algae? So color is how your brain reads the light waves that come through your eye. There's 3 major opponents: the light, what is the background, what is the thickness and density, and how that interacts with your eye for your brain to relate that information into what we call color. The meat products, a whole muscle cut is mainly influenced by myoglobin, but also hemoglobin and cytochrome. And when we expose meat products during cooking, myoglobin loses its stability, and that's why we get a brown color at the end of cooking a meat product. Pet parents, they look at color. It's important in purchasing decisions. We can see here, these are different trays from one experiment, and all 6 of these trays exhibit treats with a different color pattern. In this particular experiment, that color change was driven because we used different percentages of carcass frame along with wooden breast. And as we change percentage, we definitely change color. So that makes a difference. What is the optimal color? We're hoping to do some work to investigate that and see what that might be down the road. But we look for the very visual characteristic of a treat and base our preference on that. Then we look at instrumental color. We measure that with a Hunter lab. It's one of the most common ways to measure it. I do want to point out quickly these scales. The lightness goes from 0 in black to 100 in white. What we call redness values goes from -20 to +120. And then yellowness goes from -120 on blue to a +120 on yellow. And one important note, and I won't go into a lot of, I don't have much as far as results, but I want to show when we increased inclusions of algin, we did see significant differences measured through statistics. But if we look at the scale, we're right about 63 and going down to maybe 61. The reason that's important is because that's not really enough of a change for the human eye to perceive in most cases. We got the same thing for redness and yellowness. Very little change with the different algin inclusions, so color stayed stable for the product across that. But we're looking for the delta E. What is the change between two of the treatments? And we really need to get to a delta E of 2, and some authors would suggest between 4 and 6 before a human can actually observe that difference. There's a big difference in a trained color panel and a consumer panel. And so the consumer panels typically, because they don't go through that training, require a larger difference to observe that color change. So I think we were really successful in most of our studies showing that we really didn't get a lot of color change based strictly on the inclusion of the alginate and the lactate. So I think overall we've improved water retentions of treats. We seem to improve flexibility. When we dehydrate them, of course, the hardness and chewiness is increased. But we can turn products into a usable pet food treat. And we're going to go back to the economics. And I know it's easy to pick a lot of holes in this, but we put $4.92 in a product. An average sale price on retail on pet food treats is $18.20 with a 13.28 difference. So that's a big difference. And I know there's a lot of holes in this data. It's a really short, really easy calculation. But with that size of a gap, it's pretty easy to see how these lower price protein products, which are highly nutritious, can easily be incorporated into a much higher value pet food. So we've got a demand in the market for pet treats. It's affected the animal co-product markets. Protein is high right now, and we need alternative sources. Hydrocolloids are not new technologies. They're in salsas and lunch meats and everything that we currently eat today. But we can use those in some cases with these other lower value proteins and increase the ability to bind those proteins together. We had treats with up to 40% liquefied liver that really formed and bound some pretty adequate final products as well. So we think these characteristics that we're trying to measure, we're looking at ways they can impact purchase decisions and try to upcycle in these co-products that we don't currently have in our human menu. Completed work, again, chicken liver and beef liver and hearts, wooden breast, paws, wingtips. We're doing some things looking at thickness of a slice and how that varies and alters our texture. We've looked at texture and color so far. We're getting ready to do a bunch of sensory, just pet owner sensory purchase intent type evaluations. We've got a project coming up this spring that we're going to do palatability on. We're looking at some non-meat proteins as well, plant proteins, pea, soy, other proteins, reconstituting dehydrated proteins. I think that may be another alternative that allows a lot of flexibility in product development. Insects, we just got our first delivery of insects yesterday to start working with. And then aquaculture, fish trim, tails, skins, those are already on the pet food treat market, and we're looking at trying to evaluate how they work with the hydrocolloid technology. In the future, we're going to do a lot more sensory. Oxidative chemistry, I think, is important in shelf life. Currently, we haven't treated anything with any stabilizers and measured that. I think that's important going forward. Complete and balanced for a complete raw pet diet or a cooked pet diet. In-home palatability tests, we're hoping to do some of those soon with pet owners. I think the future's wide open. Field applications, what if you had a treat that both the human and the dog could eat? What about military applications out in the field, or the trainer can have some jerky out of the same bag that they're feeding their dog from and not worry about it being unhealthy for one or the other? What if we could deliver nutrients using these products, to countries? We look at vitamin nutrition and mineral nutrition. Countries that aren't getting enough, like B12 that you get from animal protein because there's not a lot of meat available, vitamin A, things like that. What if we can supplement humans down the road? I think the doors are wide open to progress this and move this forward. That's all I had for my presentation. I want to thank you. None of this would be possible without the contributions from all the current and former students in the lab. And again, we do our work out here at the Miller Center, and we have these facilities thanks to all of you in the industry and all of your support. So at that time, I'll be happy to take any questions that anyone might have, and thank you all again for having me.
Well, thank you, Charles. But before we get started answering questions, we'd like to share a brief video, and then we'll be right back to answer the questions submitted during today's presentation.
Trim meat and plant-based proteins can be processed to look and work more like whole muscle cuts. Here we will show you how the PetSure structuring and forming technologies work. In this example, we have taken chunked trim meat and restructured it into this finished whole muscle-like chub. As you can see, it resembles a whole muscle cut that with PetSure's restructuring and forming technology can be further processed like any other whole muscle cut. This is a cost-effective way to transform trim meat into high-value, nutritious, solid meat products while improving production efficiency.
This is just one in a series of videos highlighting product usage examples and new ideas. Visit the PetSure webpage to see more ways to turn your imagination into reality.
Dr. Starkey, our first question is, why did your team select to use sodium alginate as opposed to other hydrocolloids?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different gums and other products out there. Carrageenan was widely used in the market, especially in meats, and was a very effective hydrocolloid, but due to certain issues about potentially safety and also harvesting conditions and techniques of workers involved in getting carrageenan, it got a lot of bad press. The reason we're using sodium alginate is it has a history of working well in meat proteins. We may have to switch gears as we get into some of these alternative proteins and plant protein sources. And that's some things we will have to experiment with and try.
Perfect. Okay. Some product developers could be concerned with the amount of endogenous bone material in these types of raw materials. How did your team address those potential issues?
So it can be an issue. One thing a lot of people don't remember is bone is made of protein. It's mainly a collagen structure framework that gets mineralized later on during growth. So there's a lot of high nutrients in bone, amino acids, minerals, things like that. It is of concern in some cases for two reasons. One is, the foreign material concern that it could be a choking hazard or something. The second might be a calcium phosphorus. It's very high in calcium and phosphorus, and we don't want to overdo that drastically in our dietary formulas. So we're making pet treats which are not complete and balanced. They are just added supplemental treats. So the calcium phosphorus is not a huge proportion of the total intake per day. At least that's the hope if we're not abusing giving our pets treats. And as far as the size of the bone fragments, we're grinding well below 2 millimeters. And that is typically what at least what I'm told, x-rays and other devices for form, material, and quality control characteristics are being used in the industry. So the bone fragments are quite small enough that there shouldn't be any choking or hazard or anything like that once we've completed the grinding.
Perfect. Your next question is, why are texture analysis important in these types of studies? Is product texture important to pets?
I don't know that it's that important to the dog or the cat. It is important to the consumer. I don't like biscuits that break up and leave crumbs all over my floor. And so something that kind of binds together better, I think creates less mess when you offer it to the pet. I personally believe, and this is 100% opinion, but I personally believe that dogs and cats like something that they have to chew on, can exercise the muscles in their jaws, fight and tear with it, and take their time to consume it. So a flexible, pliable texture to me might be more appealing. Now that may be my bias based on the type of dogs I have and the activities they undergo when I'm watching them. But I think there's something to that, keeping them busy a little longer. It's not something they swallow whole instantly, and then they're immediately looking for something else. It gives them something to spend some time on and hopefully enjoy over a longer period of time.
Well, and your answer might cover this next question, but I'll ask it anyway. Why did the team elect to work with jerky type treats?
It was easier. There's a lot of jerky type treats on the market. It was something we could chub into a sausage, do the slices, dehydrate them, and get a lot of samples for testing. Pretty easy with a little less input of labor. Meat sticks are something that we're looking at doing too. Those are pretty easily to produce. But really, it was to go through the whole process where we not only mix and generate a raw product, but we're also evaluating cooking techniques. So again, as a professor, part of my job is teaching. And so we're trying to get students to ask the right questions, to go in and do the test and evaluate the differences that are caused by different cooking temperatures or times or things of that nature. We've overcooked treats and they become very brittle and they don't look good as a finished product. And that's a way for the students to learn how important it is that our cook time and temperature is precise. We get a good kill. We have a good safety factor on our final product, but we also get a good end product that's higher quality and looks like something that consumer might purchase.
Wonderful. Your next question comes in from Geraldo. Will hydrolyzed proteins from byproducts form a hydrocolloid and firm product?
Hydrolyzed proteins from byproducts. I don't know the answer to that. That's not something we've actually tested. When we look at the rendering process, we do have chemical changes occurring in those proteins. And if you look at some of like liver or the digest products, we have changes and alterations where proteins are somewhat denatured. Their 3D structure opens up and they bind to things differently. So none of those products we've really done any testing on yet. I think it'd be interesting to do. Overall, like I said, there's certain hydrocolloids work better with meat proteins than others. So we've got a lot of investigation left to do to really determine the answers to some of those questions.
Okay. Your next question comes in from Fernando. Wings have become very highly demanded product for human consumption. How much price impact does this market imprint onto an animal treat?
Well, when we're using the wingtip, which is not sold as wings, you only really sell the drumette and the mid joint to most restaurants. The wingtip is still a co-product. And so the high demand to me drives more production of that co-product, and therein lies a more valuable protein stream to use in these products.
Okay, real good. Next one is color measurements in meat science are complex and can sometimes be confusing. Why are baseline color measurements important in pet treat development?
That's very correct statement and a great question. We're measuring color based on consumer perception. I don't think it matters as much to a dog or cat. They do have some color sight. They do, use that for selecting things somewhat. If we look at a bird, color can be very important in what treat they might select. So it probably has more importance in avian species than it does in some of our mammalian species. But color is very important to the consumer and can somewhat drive or alter their purchase intent. And so we're looking at color, especially over time, to see what kind of alterations we get. We don't get a browning effect. We don't get a negative impact caused duly from the algin inclusion that would negate a purchase intent by a consumer. So that's really why we're looking at color, is the human factor. The dogs aren't buying the pet treats, it's the humans.
That's right. Next question. Since these product models were not fully commercialized, can you share any insights on the initial product stability? Does this technology impact product stability?
We haven't done great measurements on product stability other than color change over time. We're not adding any acids or other stabilizing agents, antioxidants at this time. This is very, very early work just to see if we can get the gelation and the texture. But that is part of the reason we've been measuring color. We're looking to add some stabilizers, antioxidants, organic acids, and things of that nature to future products to get a better assessment of that. I think it's going to be important for further shelf life. However, in the jerky treat, we've really been assessing the water activity and trying to make sure it's low enough that it's shelf stable. Once we reach that lower water activity, the shelf stability of that product's pretty good for fairly long term.
Okay, and I see we're reaching the top of the hour, so we're going to just have one last question here. It says, this is a very interesting program. Can you just help us understand why this work is important to our industry?
I don't know what industry the person asking is, but from my point of view, what I see is a lot of proteins that are being processed in animal co-products that are not being highly utilized, and they have a lower value. They're being sold at lower prices for export, sold at very low prices for rendering, and we can actually use those in incorporate those into much higher value pet treats. We all know about protein shortages on the market. Things like fish meal and the cost has skyrocketed, concerns about overfishing. There's a lot of sustainability questions. We're already producing these co-products when we process animals. So why don't we use these as an alternate, less expensive protein stream to incorporate into these higher value pet treats and final pet foods that we're manufacturing?
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Charles, and thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but if you do have additional questions, please submit them to anh.marketing@balchem.com. The Real Science Lecture series of webinars continues in March. On March 1st, when Dr. Israel Flemmenbaum from Cow Cooling Solutions in Israel will help us look at the best ways to manage dairy cows in extremely hot environments. Visit balchem.com/realscience to download the resources from today's webinar and to also see a full schedule or to register for future events. Balchem's podcast series continues to offer a deeper dive into our webinar topics. Log on to your favorite podcast platform or visit balchem.com/podcast. Subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address, and we'll send you a cool Real Science Exchange t-shirt. On behalf of Balchem and Dr. Starkey, thank you for joining us today.